Hello, everyone. This is Luke Johnson, and today I'm joined by my good friend Sophie Licor. It's been a while since we last had a recorded conversation. It's been a while since we had a real face-to-face conversation. So I'm really happy that we're able to bring you an analysis of Fyodor Dostoevsky's "The Dream of a Ridiculous Man." Um, I had noticed that Sophie had become very passionate about the works of Fyodor Dostoevsky, but I was also very busy and I didn't know if I had an opportunity to read some of the longer novels. And I said, well, Sophie, maybe there's like a poem we could analyze because I got all this other stuff going on. Couldn't find any poetry of Dostoevsky's, but I did find these short stories. I guess there are 12 short stories. And I guess, Sophie, have you read them all?
No, I've started reading Dostoevsky with the landlady,
Uh
and
huh.
after this, Notes from the Underground, and I think
Okay.
I read the same version as Nietzsche, uh, which because he read them in French, and
Did he?
we had a similar experience when we read the landlady. We thought, oh, it's a kindred spirit.
I had no idea that Nietzsche had access to Dostoevsky. That's new information to me. But anyway,
And he
um,
read Baudelaire too.
did he?
Yeah.
I yeah, there's so much about Nietzsche that I have forgotten. I think I may have known that at one point, but my brain can only hold so much information. But I saw that one of these short stories was called "The Dream of a Ridiculous Man." I've been working on a little bit of writing that I've been studying some Jung and some Freud to get my mind around the nature of dreams, and I that title just popped out at me, and I too am a ridiculous man. And I said this story will be perfect to discuss. And you know what? I read a lot, and I have to recommend this to people. This was one of the better pieces of writing that I've read in quite some time. Now you know more about Dostoevsky than I do. Um, how do you feel this ranks? Because I thought this was fantastic literature. Did you think it was exceptional?
Yes, because I don't read many novels. I don't like fiction so much, but it's so different reading Dostoevsky because it's like a parable. It's uh, it's so deep than that, and it moves you so much, and it's about the depth of the human soul.
And so much more. I think I didn't have a chance to do any outside research because this all came together, I guess, over the past 4 days. I had a chance to go through the story twice, take some notes, and do my personal commentary, just apply it to it. So I have no idea what other people in white papers have been saying about this short story. My interpretation, Sophie's interpretation, could be way different from anything that currently exists out there. I will say that I was not able to find any sort of presentations on YouTube, or I don't think anywhere else. I don't think anyone else has done what we're doing today. So it's always nice uh, to do something that no one has done before. Did you find anyone else who's been discussing this book in a
Well,
public forum like this?
I don't know, but I found this book written by Paul Evdokimov, who uh, who was a Russian theologian who emigrated to France in the 20th century, and I think it was in his thesis he wrote about Dostoevsky and the problem of evil, and there he quotes long passages from the Dream of the Ridiculous Man in one chapter, which is called The Ideology of Dostoevsky. And that's how I've heard the first time about this short story. And I was so moved by what I read that I wanted to read the story itself.
Yeah, I think we haven't really talked about this, but I think you and I have both intimated in our own ways that this was an emotional read for both of us. And maybe there's some time to get into that. Uh, I think, I mean, it shortly, all I would say is that I relate to the character of the narrator in the story of Ridiculous Man because I seem to have had, for lack of a better word, a religious experience that I cannot communicate to the vast majority of humanity. Um, and so I know what it's like to be mocked and scoffed and ridiculed and to be an outsider as the result of something that I cannot fully put into words despite my rather large vocabulary. So I identified with this character. I don't know if you want to say any more about why this text resonated with you.
Yes, the first thing I too resonated very much with his experience, and not only the fact of being an outcast, but also his existential struggle, and also this text is really about the condition of man since the beginning uh, of time, since and especially since the fall, and our condition. The what strikes me was that it is about uh, this problem that Albert Camus wrote in the Myth of Sisyphus, that the most serious problem of philosophy was is life worth living?
I'm gonna just say yes. Yes, it is. So if you'll stick with us, I think you'll find that this won't be. It's going to start off a little gloomy, but ultimately, this is a life affirming text, right? Ultimately, our narrator does find meaning in life, and I think if you're depressed, if you're melancholic, um, I think this might be consoling literature. I'm not saying it's going to fix everybody's problems, but I think this is a life affirming message that we're getting here.
Without taking the easy road. He really
Right.
go down into the most uh, intense despair, and he watches evil face to face, and he came out of it transformed.
He did. So, without further ado, why don't we just kind of jump into it? I think what Sophie and I are going to do is I did a, a kind of a reduced summary of the text, and I think we'll at the end of each paragraph of that summary, we'll just like chime in with some things that we think are important discussion nodes, and just go from there. If you're ready, Sophie.
Yes.
Okay. So this in his short stories, this is chapter 14, part 1, and the narrator knows that he is a ridiculous man who is considered a madman. People laugh at him, but he has sympathy for them because they do not know the truth. He knows that he has been ridiculous since the age of 7. When he attended university, the sciences confirmed how ridiculous he was. The only thing he resented was that his mockers assumed he did not know that he was absurd. Growing into manhood, he becomes calmer and he comes to believe that nothing in the world matters. It is all the same to him if the world existed or if it did not. And Sophie sort of challenged me on this, but I said in a way this allowed him to kind of break free from the perceptions of others. She'll quibble with me on that. If there was nothing in the past and nothing in the future, why care about anything? But on November 3rd, our narrator finds out the truth. So I'll pause there and let's talk about some of the things I just mentioned in this paragraph. Sophie, would you like to go first?
Yes. what I wanted to say is that there's been three phases in the narrator, in the three ways he reacted to the mockeries of others. The At the beginning, he was afraid of others' judgment, that they find him weird and rejected him because of this. So at the beginning, he was concerned about his ego, and after this, he became indifferent because he was depressed. And after his religious experience, uh, he was sad that they were making fun of him, but not because for ego related reasons, but he was sad because they could not relate to what he was saying, and he found it very hard to make himself understood.
Well, would you like to add more, or I could start bringing in some of my questions and commentary?
You can talk if you want.
Sure. So the first thing, and I don't want to give away the store because there's a lot more of the story that we have to cover if you're unfamiliar with the text. Um, but we bring up this notion that he knows the truth. Okay, so I think we have to ask ourselves a couple questions. You know, why do people mock those who might possibly be in possession of the truth? We don't necessarily need to answer the question of what the truth is at this moment. I think that'll come towards the end of our discussion. Um, but I wanted to think psychologically, existentially about why truth, if it is truth, is often met with laughter and ridicule. Why do we attack that which we do not know with unconscious laughter? What does this reveal about the nature of the human psyche? Is it because laughter is a defense mechanism that preserves our worldview? If we laugh at something, we don't have to expend energy seriously refuting it or assimilating it into our framework of understanding. What do you think, Sophie?
Well, it goes back to the story of the cavern of Plato. Uh,
Yes.
the philosopher escapes from the cavern and sees the forms, and when he comes back, people don't listen to him and even want to kill him, if I remember well. And it's people. That's what they also explain in the modern uh, adaptation of the Cavern of Plato, which is the Matrix movie. Uh,
Right.
that
The Agent Smiths, right?
Yes, that everybody is potentially an agent. They will fight to preserve the system, which give them peace of mind.
Right. So, like, you know, laughter might be the first stage of trying to defend against an attack upon a prevailing societally agreed upon worldview. But if the person is persistent, is like, no, this isn't a joke. I'm for real. I saw that they're making shadow puppets with a fire behind us. It's all a lie. Come out from the cave. They go, and they love their shadow puppets. They love their shadow puppet judging contest. How dare you disrupt this? Let's kill him. That seems Violence seems to be a stage that follows laughter.
Yes, I also read about the five stages of uh, grief, or how I'm. I need to find the translation into
I
it.
think the first is denial, isn't it?
Yes.
I don't know
Uh,
what happens after that. I have to look it up. But I'm pretty sure denial is the first one. Yeah. So
yes.
it is like if someone's bringing you information that contradicts your worldview, it's a little bit like you're mourning the death of your old self. right?
Yes, and also I posted a link on our document we did to prepare this uh, video, and about there is a popular YouTube channel of philosophy, the Academy of Ideas. They did a video about the suffering and the nature of genius, and they talked about how people um, use a defense mechanism in order to protect themselves from the tragic sense of life. And in order to protect, the majority of people are protected against this tragic sense of life using by having boundaries. For instance, their family, um, the state, their job, their they and also their political opinions, or they need to have these boundaries to in order to escape the abyss of uh, regarding life face to face.
Right. So true, so true. But what's interesting is, if I can move down a little bit further in our commentary, is what's interesting is that our narrator moves from being a ridiculous man to a madman in the eyes of others. And he says that he's known ever since the age of 7 that he was ridiculous. I guess meaning that he was just kind of this nail that stuck out. And there seems to be a difference between being a ridiculous person and being someone who is air quotes mad, who is broken through from the other side, glimpsed, what's beyond the veil and tried to communicate that to other individuals. I guess the thing, I suppose you and I were sort of naturally ridiculous people. I think you and I probably our entire lives. I haven't known you your entire life, but I think we're kindred spirits. I would imagine that you and I have just always found it a little bit hard to fit into society. And I wonder if that's what ridiculous means. What do you think?
Yes, I think at the beginning, uh, the first part of his life before his dream, uh, I think it's true to what he experienced. Um, but like I said, there is this second phases where he started to become indifferent to everything, and so in maybe we'll come back to this, but will in these phases he's more in like the Ecclesiastes. Uh, Everything is meaningless,
Right.
and so it's he may not be concerned about being strange anymore.
Yeah, I think because the next thing, right, is he talks about how he went to the university and studied all the sciences and had it confirmed to him that he was ridiculous, and which is very curious. Because before he went to university, possibly there was the chance that maybe the sciences could iron him out and kind of answer a lot of his questions and make him such not such an odd person. But what's interesting, we we have a discussion very notably. He says the sciences, and at the end of the story, uh, when he's in the dream land or the dream world, he's interacting with a group of people that does not know science. So science is very much, I don't want to say under attack, but critiqued here. And I have to wonder if what he's trying to communicate about this ridiculousness is that he had this fundamental instinct that there was something foolish about science trying to master all the important existential questions of the universe, and that there was a more intuitive way that we could be in touch with the world that had been forgotten and suppressed as the result of science. And I wonder if we start to see that very here. The
Yeah.
the the reason he's has this ridiculousness confirmed to him is that the more and more he listens to what science has to say, he realizes they aren't getting it at all.
Well, actually, there's an important passage in the notes from the underground about this question. Uh, I would need to find it where I think it's in this story that the hero says that if a no, it maybe not be in this. There is an important passage about this, and I don't know. And there is another place where Dostoyevsky said that if A plus B equals I need to find it
Well,
because
that's okay. You can
it,
find it.
it
Well,
speaks for itself, but uh, he would prefer going to Jesus than going to the the truth. If the truth was if it was demonstrated to him that Jesus was not the Son of God, he or didn't exist, he would still go to Jesus. And what he means by that is that um, the meaning, the meaning of life, the fact of is being connected to uh, to the supreme meaning, which is God. And if you and the rational truth does not um, answer this thirst which is in man, and if man is disconnected from uh, the true source of meaning, uh, he becomes what's the good word, he becomes he deteriorates.
right. And I think we have to ask ourselves, why does that occur? Because I think if we had some very scientifically minded people listening right now, they might go, well, that seems like a personal problem. Or it could be the case that could be something fundamentally problematic about science, that it's incomplete in a way that prevents a total understanding that it seeks after. But that's a larger critique of science that I think we'll revisit when we look at their idyllic condition. So I think maybe we should move on if that's all right.
Yes, what I wanted to explain is that science should not be used for purposes it is not made for. And science cannot provide this meaning that people need. And the problem with our current society is that we tend to think that a lot of people tend to think that science is going to solve all of our existential problems. And also it's not only science, it's the rational way of experiencing life, and
Right.
which
Yeah.
disconnects us from true life.
Right. Right. Well, we could say a lot more about that, but yeah, I think that's an important thing to note. The only other thing that I thought I'd bring up here is I thought was very. Do you have any idea why he's very specific that his vision occurs on November 3rd? I the only thing I could think of was just doing some basic numerology that on the calendar, at least in the West, that's 11/3, and if you do some numerology, it can get to 33, which is a Christ number. But I couldn't. Just doing a cursory search, I couldn't. It's very interesting that he's very emphatic that it happened on November 3rd, and I don't think Dostoevsky would have included November 3rd without good reason. Do you have any ideas about that?
It could be an event of his own life, because it wouldn't
That's
be
true.
the first time that he inserted some elements of his life in the stories.
I don't know a lot about his personal biography, uh, but do you have any guesses about what event that this could
No,
correspond to?
I don't know.
Okay, but well, I think it's a good conjecture anyway. So moving on, uh, so our narrator is on his way home on a gloomy night at 11 p.m. after a long day, and he's very hungry. And he looks up at a star, and the star gives him the idea to kill himself. He had determined to do this 2 months prior with a revolver. However, he kept delaying, waiting for the right moment. The star gave him the thought to kill himself that night. While he was looking at the sky, a distressed girl of 8 takes him by the elbow and is calling out, "Mammy, Mammy." He understood that her mother was dying, but directed her to find a policeman, someone more suitable to address the matter. So, what would you like to say about this set of events, Sophie?
Yes, I think it's important to understand in which state of mind the narrator is at this part. So, like I said before, he's like the ecclesiastic in the Bible, who says everything is meaningless. There is nothing new under the sun, and he wants to be completely indifferent to everything that happens in the world, because he he does not think that life is worth living. He does not feel alive in the world, so he wants to disappear. He wants to cease to exist.
Right. If he has nothing to hold on to, what's the point of living it from his point of view? What I thought was interesting was that a star gives him the idea to kill himself. And I have to wonder, I look at stars a little differently these days. Stars, biblically understood, were not thought to be, you know, billions of light years away and these gaseous orbs or whatever they are. But in many aspects of the Bible, they're thought to be angels, entities, some sort of being. And you have to wonder if this star, if he's thinks he's having some sort of interdimensional contact with this higher being, and that thought has been planted within him. Interestingly, I believe the air quote star that he's looking at is Ceres. I think we find that out. And that just set off my phone because Siri thinks I'm talking to her, and it's across the room. But what's interesting is, according to modern scientific classification, Ceres is a dwarf planet. But in the Bible, there are no planets. There are stars and wandering stars. And yeah, I think we may have an aspect of interdimensional communication here. Whether or not that was Dostoyevsky's intention, maybe there's some other process going on between him and the star. But I don't know exactly why a star would give you direction to kill yourself.
Well, another thing he said that he was waiting for a moment where a time where life was less indifferent to him, to kill himself. So he didn't want to kill himself when he's completely indifferent. And
Right.
maybe seeing the star made him feel a little more awake than usual.
Yeah, the star could have been a point of focus that said, you are completely indifferent. It's time.
Yeah.
Get it on with. Get on with it. So the scene shifts back to his apartment, and he can hear his neighbors fighting, drinking, and playing cards. He has adjusted to all of this by sitting up all night and just letting ideas come and go. He sits down at the table and puts the revolver before him. He would have shot himself had it not been for the little girl. He had felt pity that evening. He felt something for the first time in a long time. If he was going to end himself, how could he kill himself if he felt sorry for the girl? He can only kill himself if nothing matters. If he shot himself, the world would cease to be. But now it seemed that the world needed him. This is a very curious concept we'll have to play out a little bit more. He seems to think that these people are manifestations of himself. And he goes into a strange reflection that he lived on the moon or Mars and then found himself on Earth with a memory of committing suicide there and wouldn't necessarily feel any shame about what he did. And these questions start to rage within him in such a way that he can't just kill himself like he originally planned to do. And I think maybe I should include the quote here that about why to just elaborate on his reading, his reasoning. The quote from the story is, "It seemed clear to me that life and the world somehow depended upon me now. I may almost say that the world now seemed created for me alone. If I shot myself, the world would cease to be, at least for me. I say nothing of its being likely that nothing will exist for anyone when I am gone, and that as soon as my consciousness is extinguished, the whole world will vanish too and become void like a phantom, as a mere appurtenance of my consciousness. For possibly all this world and all these people are only me myself." It's a very strange concept, uh,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much maybe you can help. I'm having trouble expressing it,
Yes,
but
I. Yeah.
maybe you can help me on. Maybe you can help me express what he's trying to say here. It's like the wor- the world is a complete manifestation of his consciousness. This girl is in a way part of himself, tugging him back to reality. And this is a very esoteric understanding of things. But at its most basic level, I think he feels like he can only really shove off this mortal coil if he cares for nothing in the world. And at least this girl, whether she be a manifestation of his mind or an actually existent person, has made him feel something for the first time in a long time, and therefore doesn't have a clear conscience about killing himself.
Yes, it's. I can relate to what he says because I have experienced it, and it's a very uh, strange experience. Um, uh, People may classify this as a in a psychology, as a derealization, uh, which means that you don't really think that there is an objective reality outside of yourself, and as a consequence, uh, so that's the first thing that the first aspect of it, and the second is the girl. um, it's how can I say this? It's he's he wanted to be completely indifferent because he wanted to die, and that's a question someone who who feels that life is meaningless uh, may ask himself, uh, what's my responsibility towards others? uh, who am I living for?
Right. And that's why he wouldn't necessarily have felt the shame about killing himself on the moon or Mars. It wouldn't affect, there was no
Now,
one.
yes, about this, I think there is another. I wrote. It made me think about Hamlet. The speech, "To be or not to be," and all this is very uh, is something I can relate a lot. And this in this speech, Hamlet is saying that the reason why people don't kill themselves is that they are afraid that it may be worse after. So the only reason they don't kill themselves is, even if they are miserable on earth, they're afraid that the afterlife will be worse. And in this part, the ridiculous man, he's afraid that he will continue to live in a different planet, and that his past actions will follow him.
Oh, I see. I see. I
so
see.
so he's afraid he won't escape
I
this.
see.
And it made me think also about Kierkegaard, The Sickness and to Death, where he says that for the Christian, there is something which is worse than the physical illness, which is the real sickness and to death, which is despair, and from which you cannot escape by killing yourself.
Well, I would say also, I mean, if you take Christianity very seriously, I mean, there's the possibility, I mean, if we were to de-intellectualize it and to think about it as a lived reality, I mean, there's the very real prospect of hell too, you know, not just that guilt and shame may follow us to another place, but that there actually may be, a, something to, I don't want to get into any sort of theology of hell, but I mean, I think that plays on the mind of very, uh, the fundamentalist Christian. But I know not every Christian believes in the doctrine of hell.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yes, I think the important question is, can we escape from our own destiny? Can we cease to exist? And I think it's the question that Kierkegaard was asking, and also the problem of the ridiculous man uh, is that he wants to cease to exist, but it's not possible.
right, right. I'm pretty well convinced that there's either way you're going, there's life after this life, and our narrator soon finds that out too.
And also, he wants he really wants that there is no other consciousness than himself, that than his, that because if there are other consciousness, then if he kills himself, he's responsible towards them, and he doesn't want this. And that's why this meeting with the girl is dangerous to him, because he if if she has a consciousness like him, then he's guilty of not helping her. Whereas if she's not, she hasn't a consciousness, then if she's only a part of his consciousness, then if he kills himself, he doesn't do anything wrong.
Right. So this, if there is, so one of the right, so one of the questions you're saying that is haunting him, that is, if he does take his life and he lives on, then there's going, and she's actually an existing person that he turned his back on, that not helping her, this guilt will follow him wherever he goes and make things worse.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Great insights. Well, shall we proceed?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we could say a lot more. I
Yeah.
mean, we could say a lot more. We just have a lot of ground to cover still. So he puts off the pistol shot. He suddenly fell asleep at his table, something that never happens. And he writes that dreams seem to be spurred on by desire, not reason. I think a lot of us would agree with that we're not being rational in our dreams. And all sorts of incomprehensible things happen there. For instance, in his dreams, when he does dream, His brother, who died 5 years earlier, is there. And he accepts both that his brother is dead and that he is present. But he then has a significant dream where he sees the truth. And I could get into that dream, but do you want to say anything about the nature of dreams before we get into the content of his dream in part 2, chapter 15?
Uh, I think there. I think we can move on to because yes, we can explain the psychoanalyst uh, interpretation of dreams theory, or Jungian archetypes, but maybe it will take long. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that he, in his dream, he can simultaneously hold two contradictory ideas, that his brother is dead and present at the same time. And the way that I look at dreams, it's very real. It's very possible for me to understand that dreams are sort of a corridor to a higher dimensional reality. Um,
mm,
I tend to accept a biblical understanding of dreams. You have all sorts of dreams in the Bible where people are given foreknowledge of events that are going to occur, and they're also given prophecy and all sorts of things. Um, it it's okay for me personally as a Bible believing Christian to think that when we dream, we're actually in touch with an actual another realm. And I think Dostoevsky, that's one of the
mm.
realizations that Dostoevsky has in his dream. But we'll get to that. I know that it goes
Yeah,
against Freud. I know that goes against Freud and Jung, but
no,
that
no,
seems
no. To the on the contrary, I think that's that would be compatible with and it's not necessarily contradictory. Uh,
well, it could
and
be. I think it could be made compatible with Jung, but I don't think it could be made compatible with Freud.
Perhaps yes, but so in the what I wanted to say also is that in dreams you are outside of time, so that's the reason why it's not um, surprising that we see deceased people.
Right?
And I often see my grandparents as if they were alive.
Oh, that and you interact with them and things.
Yes,
That's
but these dreams are kind of sad because it's like they are not dead, but they are almost dying, and during all my dream I try to prevent them from dying, so it's not really, maybe it's just my sadness my which creates these dreams.
Sophie has got me recording my dreams as of late, which I is an interesting habit that I would recommend other people to take up. So, um, moving on to part 2, chapter 15. This is where things get real exciting. So, the narrator suddenly dreams that he aimed the revolver at his heart, not his head. The walls and tables and everything starts heaving. With his shot, no pain, but blinded and numb. He is lying on his back. People are walking around him, then another break. He was in a coffin. The idea strikes him that he is dead. He could not see or move, but could reflect and did not reject the facts. Then he was buried in the earth. He felt damp and cold. He has no idea how long he was in the grave. Water drops on him and calls on a power that is responsible for what is happening. He calls out in case he is being punished for his suicide. He knew everything would change immediately. He was unearthed by some unknown being, and they are flying through space. He does not question the being, and he does not know how long he was flying. He was not afraid. In the darkness, he sees a star and asks if it was Ceres. The being replied that it is the star you saw on your way home. The narrator does not like the being. He had expected this journey through space. He had expected non existence, surprised there is life beyond the grave. He does not want to live again. During this journey through space, he finally captures the glimpse of a sun, a duplicate sun. It was a sweet feeling, but if that is the sun, where is the earth? The companion points to an emerald star in the distance they are flying towards. So, what's going on here? Is it the same earth? He cries out for the older earth. His companion sorrowfully says, "You shall see it all. How can it be repeated and what for? Is there suffering up on the new earth?" He wants a place with suffering so that he can love. His companion leaves him and he finds himself on a Greek island. Everything was the same but had a festive radiance. The people of the island came to him and kissed him, beautiful people with joy in their voices. Okay, there's a lot to
Yes,
there's a lot to cover here. I just very quick I want to summarize. He did not kill himself. He dream kills himself, but goes through all the experiences of what it would be like for the body to be discovered, be in the ground, have an out of body experience, go to a different dimension. And he's very much in a place that resembles Earth, except it's much better. And I have some other things I want to say about that, but I'm going to let Sophie talk about it first.
yes. So there's a first period in which he stays for a long time in his coffin.
Right.
And
I took I took a lot of liberties with this, guys.
yes, and when I read this, it made me think that it's worse than hell. And
Yeah.
and there's a passage in which he rebels. He did not say it's against God, but we understand that he rebels against God because he feels that God is punishing him for killing himself. And it made me think that, you know, it made me think of the song by Leonard Cohen. Uh, one of the last he wrote before he died. You Want It Darker, and I think it's a song which the ridiculous man could have sung while he was in the coffin.
That's interesting. What's the name of the song again?
You Want It Darker, and
Okay.
I copied some of the lyrics in our document. Uh,
Well, I might get a copyright against it, but we'll check it out. We'll check it out.
yes, I just wanted to read a few of them because it's related to what we are saying. He says, "If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, it means I'm broken and lame. If thine is the glory, then mine must be the shame." And also, "A million candles burning for the help that never came." And also, "There's a lullaby for suffering and a paradox to blame, but it's written in the scriptures and it's not some idle claim. You want it darker, we kill the flame." So the ridiculous man was desperate to. He was in his metaphysical revolt against God. He wanted to cease to exist, but God does not want it.
No, he does not. Would you like to say more? I have a lot of things that I could say, but I want to make sure we cover the things you want to say first.
So what's worse than hell is be, continuing t- the continuation of consciousness in the coffin, and drops falling onto to him. It's like a torture method.
Yeah, I was gonna say they might employ that down at Guantanamo Bay.
Yes, I've heard of a torture method which was similar, and so he cannot kill himself, and God does not want to, and then God is going to send someone to him, and he's going to help him get out of his um, his own prison, his own mind prison.
Do you mind if I chime in with some commentary?
Yes, go on.
Um, so, so Sophie mentioned that he cries out to be liberated from this prison, and we have this being that comes and sweeps him up. And what's interesting, I mean, I think it's very, if you're, I mean, it's hard not to look at this from a religious perspective, especially if you know that Dostoevsky was a religious man. Um, to not think about this, it's a living being that takes him on this journey, but it's not human. So, you know, it's very easy to think about this as being some sort of transporting angel. What's interesting is I actually looked in the Bible. There's really, I mean, you could argue about it. I mean, there's when after Jesus has been killed, people find that, and the stone has been rolled away, and the tomb is empty. There are angels there, but there's really only um, there's really only one passage in the Bible where there's sort of these ministering spirits or angels. It's Luke 16:22. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Um, uh, I mean, you know, I think it's interesting that in the grave he has this revelation that he wants to go back to earth. He wants to be at an earth where there's suffering so he can love.
Yes.
I found that to be kind of interesting that it took this with a 7 or 8 year old girl to come out of nowhere and say, "Mammy, mammy," for him to have the realization that, you know, I mean, there's so much suffering in the world. Why is he just now, after he's fake dead, I should say, or dream dead, or whatever we want to call his existential status or metaphysical status, why he's just now realizing that he needs to be in a place where there's sorrow so that he can love people? Like, why it
Yes.
took this point in his life.
Yes, this past is very important. So I think we should not rush this part, because what we have to understand is that the angel take him to another earth which has not experienced the fall. So it's like the Garden of Eden. People are still in the state of innocence, which is before the fall. And the ridiculous man is a consciousness which has experienced the fall. So he what Dostoyevsky explains, and what also both Luke and I did a video before on Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and he explains the same thing in Brave New World. If you remember the character of John the Savage, maybe I copied what John said at the end of Brave New World.
If you have it on hand.
Yes, I copied it to our document. Yes. So the problem is that a consciousness which has experienced the fall cannot go back to this state of innocence. So now, because it will be a regression for this consciousness. So this consciousness has to go through suffering, because if this consciousness is avoiding suffering, which is like the Brave New World society, if we build a society using the rational mind in order to avoid suffering, then it will be meaningless, and the man's consciousness will be people are going to become slaves, and so it won't be a way to go back to our previous state of innocence, but it will be a degeneration of humanity.
Most definitely having everything scientifically managed there where everyone's on drugs, engaging in orgies and everything else. Yeah. But
So
I
so
would, I just to interject here, I would say that, and I don't know if I agree with Dostoevsky. We'll see this later on. I don't know if he thinks that the condition of the fall is irremedial. Um, are
well, yeah,
irremediable.
what
That's what I should,
well
irremediable. Yeah.
yes, there is a way to resolve the issue, but this way is not to go back to what we were before. That's what he's explaining. There is no going back, so we have to to go forward, and we have to experience suffering, and that's what I want. That's why I wanted to read this extract from Brave New World, in which John the Savage is saying, I don't want comfort, I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin. And you have also to put this in parallel with another um, book from Dostoyevsky, which is the Brothers Karamazov, in which there is a poem, The Great Inquisitor.
Oh yes, that's really wonderful.
And so it seems that Aldous Huxley copied a lot from the Great Inquisitor, because it's basically the same story. The Great Inquisitor is a so it's a story of Jesus coming back to Earth at the period of Inquisition, and he goes to Spain, and there is an inquisitor which rules over the consciousness of people, and so people are in this state of innocence, so he recreates an artificial innocence, and people are not responsible for their sins, and they have no freedom. And he says to Jesus that if he did really love people, he would not have put the burden on their shoulder, the burden of freedom. And he reproached this to Jesus, because he allows people to fall, to because of this freedom they experience suffering, and they can commit sin. And so he says that the freedom is a poisoned gift. And Jesus does not say a word in this story, because he isn't allowed to say any more word than what he said during his life. And so the notion of freedom is important. And there is another author, philosopher, Nikolai Berdyaev, who wrote about Dostoevsky, and he wrote about freedom a lot. And he says that there are two kinds of freedom. There is the consequence of the fall is that people experience freedom. And an important thing that he said about this, and I will read it because I copied this part. I'm sorry it's long, but I'm trying
No,
to
it's fine.
explain
It's
this.
fine. Sure.
Yes. So Berdyaev says in his book Dostoevsky, uh, to climb from evil to a high spiritual level, one must denounce evil in oneself and suffer terribly. And these sufferings Dostoevsky depicted. The good that can be derived from evil is attained only by the way of suffering and repudiation of evil. Dostoyevsky believed firmly in the redemptive and regenerative power of suffering. Life is the expiation of sin by suffering. Freedom has opened the path of evil to man. It is a proof of freedom, and man must pay the price. The price is suffering, and by it, the freedom that has been spoiled and turned into its contrary is reborn and given back to man. Therefore, Christ is the Savior, freedom itself. And there is also a sentence which I wanted to read. It's about, yes, it's not on the same page, but he says that before this paragraph, there are paragraphs which are very important. He says that the problem of evil and of wrongdoing is part and parcel of the problem of freedom. Without freedom, evil is unexplainable. Wherever there is freedom, there is evil. If there were no freedom, then God alone would be responsible for evil. Dostoevsky understood this as well as anybody, and this part is important, he also understood that without freedom, goodness would not exist either. The whole secret of human life and destiny depends on this notion. Freedom is irrational, and therefore it can create both good and evil. To reject freedom on the pretext that it can bring forth evil is to make the evil twice as bad, for if unconstrained good be the only good, then compulsion and enforcement, so far from being desirable, are an aspect of Antichrist. And what it means is that you can force goodness, because if you try to force goodness by depriving people from freedom, you will get evil instead.
Right. Right. Thank you for bringing those readings in. I think they are very elucidating.
So you have the whole explanation from this part where the ridiculous man is regretting earth with suffering, because to his consciousness it's not possible to come back to this state where evil didn't exist.
Right.
So he
Yeah.
has to experience good and evil and freedom in order to find back uh, the good and meaningful life.
Yeah. I mean, if you could imagine what a place where there wasn't sin and evil, it's almost like he doesn't even want to go there. He's been so trained to not be receptive of such a place because it would mean sort of it would involve dehumanization, or at least he thinks that might be one of the preconceptions that he has, or that you would somehow be less than human if you were in a place where there wasn't sin and sorrow.
Yes, and there wouldn't be freedom as well.
Right. Right. Which is the quintessential aspect of what it means to be a human being for many of us. I think we need to get into this, describe this place where he is, and try to understand what it would be like to be in a place that seems untarnished by the fall. I would challenge that a little bit. The only thing I'd say before moving on to the next paragraph of the summary is that I think it's interesting that Dostoevsky has him land on a Greek island. Um, John the Revelator, the author of the Book of Revelation, he too was on a Greek island, Patmos, when he had his ecstatic vision experience. And I think it's no coincidence that Dostoevsky put his narrator on a Greek island as well. I think it's a nod to the Book of Revelation. Did you pick that up, Sophie?
I didn't pick that up, but I agree with you. It's certainly no coincidence. And just before we begin this session, I've read that Dostoevsky was preoccupied by the the apocalypse, and he thought that maybe it would be soon. It would happen soon after his death.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in that, I'm putting together a very rare audiobook right now. Sir Isaac Newton's observations upon I'm going to mangle the title, The Apocalypses of Daniel and the Book of Revelation. Not a lot of people know that Newton was deeply preoccupied with the apocalypse as well. They think of him just about with calculus and mathematics. Um, it is Newton, I believe, postulated that the apocalypse would happen in 2060. Um, it's very interesting. A lot of these great men get very preoccupied with trying to tabulate the apocalypse. I'm not sure when Dostoevsky thought it was going to happen. Do you know when he thought it was going to happen?
He didn't give a date, but he thought that it would happen soon after, not long after his death. And he gave his opinion on the destiny of man in the brothers Karamazov through the character of the starets Zosima, if you are interested.
That is interesting. I would be very interested in checking that out. Um, okay, so moving on, it was the earth untarnished by the fall. People had not sinned. It was paradise. All this earth was the same paradise. Each of them tried to reassure him. They knew everything without asking and wanted to soothe suffering from his face. These dream memories of love stay with him. He loves them. They had no science like ours. Again, there's the reference to science. Their knowledge was based on intuition. They desired different things. Their lives were full. They, without science, knew how to live. He could not understand their love and knowledge. They conversed with the trees. They lived in harmony with animals. They told things about stars which he could not understand. They loved him without him understanding. They let him adore them. He never talked to them about what he knew of the fallen earth. They were gay and sportive like children. They didn't really have to work to live. They begot children, but they weren't overcome by sensuality. They rejoiced at the revival of children. There was no jealousy. Their children were the children of all. There was death, just old people, and it had a happy ending. Only love, calm ecstasy. They had no temples, but had an uninterrupted oneness with the universe. They looked forward to fuller contact when they died. They sang before sleep. They sang the glories of the day. He speaks to them about, and then he speaks to them about this hateful, loving dichotomy within him and melancholy longing on his earth. So, um, the question I would ask, we're assuming that this is life, this is the earth before the fall, and I have to ask, is this truly Eden? Yeah, I would say that maybe not, because there is death and sexuality of some sort here. It may be something not far removed from the fall, an echo from the past that may have more immediately have taken place after the fall. But I'm not exactly sure we could say this is a perfect match with the Garden of Eden. Who knows though? But maybe if Adam and Eve have not sinned, that this would not have occurred. I think the fact that they do die is indicative that this is not the Garden of Eden. But I'm being kind of a stickler. The other thing that we'll want to get into here is, what does that make we'll find out that our narrator is going to disrupt this paradise. And what does that make our narrator if he disrupts this paradise? And we'll get into that. But the only other thing I want to say is this science. They didn't have science because they didn't need science. There was something more primordial about them. They had their psychic functions were more in tune with
Yeah,
nature, so that they didn't really need technology and things like that to come to some sort of conscious awareness of their surroundings. They just already had it pre-programmed because they had not really were not so far away from the source of their being. So
yeah,
I'll let Sophie talk from here on out.
yes, it's because their mind was not split in two like we are today. Because today we are in our state is that we think about life, and we try to put concepts between us and the experience of life. And this, if we could just have this understanding like a child, that's why Jesus said in the New Testament that you have to be like a child in order to access truth.
Right. Right.
And what he says is that if we just accepted uh, the experience of life instead of trying to uh, to intellectualize it and to put things into categories and to use the rational mind, maybe we would access a more profound truth.
Right. Right. And it's like, you know, this the science that we employ in a lot of ways is covering up the fundamental reality, because he has a much more advanced understanding of astronomy, right? We're going back to his reference of stars and Ceres and things like that. But when he arrives in this place, they're able to tell him about things about the stars that he could never imagine. So whatever science has revealed to him, it's also blinded to him to the to the to the reality that is right in front of his face.
Yes, and there are at the end of the story there is a sentence which is saying this exactly.
Oh,
Uh,
is there? I forget which one it is.
um,
Do you have it offhand?
yes,
On hand?
I just need to open uh, oh, the page because it's in the end, so it won't be complicated. Okay.
Well, do you have it?
Yes, it won't take long. It's because
Oh, sorry.
it's in the end of the story, so it will be easy to find. Uh, yes, it's the last one of the last sentences. Uh, maybe I could read a few before. The chief thing is to love others like yourself. That's the chief thing, and that's everything. Nothing else is wanted. You will find out at once how to arrange it all. And yet, it's an old truth which has been told and retold a billion times, but it has not formed part of our lives. The consciousness of life is higher than life. The knowledge of the laws of happiness is higher than happiness. This is what one must contend against, and I shall. And if only everyone wants it, it can be arranged at once. So what he means is that we put barriers between our the experience of life, and we try to rationalize everything, and as a consequence we are not living as we should.
Yes, I find that very uplifting, but I also have some theological questions about that view as well that I want to save for the end after we get through our summary. I have to say, Sophie, I love your recitations. You're such an eloquent reciter of these passages. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, if you wouldn't mind, if I could read the next part of the summary, and so we can
Okay.
talk about these bigger issues.
Okay.
I don't want to forget. I just think they're all kind of hang together, and I think we need to have them all before us before we discuss them critically. So everyone laughs about his dream. People laughed at him for his dream or thinking it was real. Could his heart give such a revelation of truth? The dream ended in him corrupting them all. The dream embraced thousands of years. He was the cause of their sin and downfall. He contaminated the sinless earth. They learned to lie, at first innocently. The germ of falsity begot sensuality, then jealousy, then cruelty, bloodshed, division, shame brought up from them. They learned of virtue. They struggled for individuality, talked in different languages, learned to love sorrow. Truth came through suffering. Then science came. As they became wicked, they talked about humanitarianism, set up government and laws and guillotines, forgot about their happiness in the past. They said it was a legend. They so longed to be happy and innocent once more and set up temples to worship their desire. Nevertheless, if they could return to their happy condition, they would refuse. We may be deceitful and unjust, but we have science and we shall arrive at the truth consciously. Science will give wisdom, and science will give us the knowledge of the laws of happiness. And they began to love themselves. Saints would come and they would pelt them with stones. Then came men to bring people together in a harmonious society. But then wars sprang up. The wise endeavored to exterminate the not wise to not hinder the triumph of this idea. There arose religions of non existence. People grew tired of their suffering and glorified suffering in their songs. He wept over them. He despised himself, that it was his doing. He was the one who brought the contamination. He taught them how to make a cross. He wanted them to kill him. They laughed at him and looked upon him as crazy. At last, they declared that he needed to be locked up in a madhouse, and then he awoke. So interestingly, he's a madman in both worlds, not only in his real world, air quotes, but also in the dream world, he becomes a madman. But you
Yeah.
know, what's interesting about this, I'll just say this, is that before his introduction into this world, they were living this Eden-esque existence. I'm not convinced it is Eden, but in a way, he brings the sin into the world. So on one hand, he's like Lucifer. He's like the serpent, right? Because he brings knowledge of this other place and he gives it to them, and it ends up it starts out innocently enough, and it ends up corrupting everything. And then by the end of it, he teaches them how to build a cross, and he wants to die, right? They have no concept of this. So in a weird way, he is sort of he's sort of in a way equating himself to both Lucifer and Jesus simultaneously, which is very interesting because this idea of Lucifer and Jesus being the same person is kind of a mystery school teaching, and also it finds itself in other religions outside of Christianity, of them being sort of like spirit brothers. But I just thought we needed to have that be part of the conversation about how Dostoyevsky both identifies as the Messiah and as the deceiver.
Yes, maybe it's related to what I read before about that they could not be good without evil, and we see this when he says that people that's why they that's when the world become corrupted. That's when they understood what human humanitarianism. So it's later. Or I wanted to read something.
But yeah, as they started to develop
The-
different countries, they developed different theories of government and humanitarianism.
Yes. So the important thing is that they understood really what good was when they experienced evil, whereas before They didn't understand really what was the good,
Well, I would
because it
disagree. I would say they understood it, but it wasn't. It was it was more immediate. They perhaps could intellectualize it after this introduction, but I don't want to say that they were bereft of all understanding. Maybe it was just not a conscious understanding of good.
well, it's not only this. It's they experience contrasts after this fall, whereas before, uh, how can I say, there is no opposites, and
Well, they had death, right? They had death. They knew that's why I'm quibbling with this that they that it's not perfectly Eden. They knew that people died. But at the same time, I'm sorry, I don't mean to contend too much with you on this. They at the same time they were assured that as soon as someone died, that they just became closer with the creator.
yes, maybe it's not a perfect description of the Garden of Eden and the state of man before the fall, but what's important to understand is that what I wanted to say is that this state of corruption that happens uh, due to the ridiculous man being among them uh, has a consequence that they experience both good and evil, and they learn to make the difference between the two. So it's like uh, Adam and Eve who ate the fruit from the tree of good and evil. So
But
before,
we have to see, with their ability to consciously understand these distinctions and to dramatize it via science, they're actually making a worse and worse life for themselves. But the reason why they won't go back to that original state that they now believe is a fairy tale is because of their pride. They'd rather figure it out for themselves through science, through philosophy, than just immediately making it manifest. So there's this element of pride that is keeping them from the original state.
yes, I think it's more complicated than this. I think it's
Of
not
course.
only about in, intellectual conceptualization of it. I think it's an experience of good and evil, and this experience is the experience of the conscious mind, and how can I explain this? And I think it needs a further resolution, and I don't think that the resolution, and I think that's Dostoyevsky's opinion as well, that I don't think the resolution is going back to before we were aware of these opposites of good and evil.
Right, right. He's not really going to be advocating the idea that we can eradicate these opposites. Um,
And I think that from my understanding, and I think it's also Dostoevsky's understanding is that in order to solve this problem, we have to integrate uh, both good and evil in ourselves, and to realize that evil is not in other people. That's a problem in our world, is that we are there's been wars between countries because one country says that the other is evil, and also there is this phenomena of the scapegoat. We say that this person or this group of person, like the Jews during the Second World War was evil, and people that's what they say in Jungian psychology, that this group there is a group of person in which or a person in which people do shadow projection, and this means that they don't want to see evil within themselves, so they they say that these other people are evil, and as a consequence, that's why there is so much hate and destruction and violence in the world. And in order to solve this problem of evil, the solution would be to be able to see this in ourselves and to realize that the other is part of ourselves, and to achieve a further communion with others.
Right. So I want to focus a little bit more on his solution here. I might have to walk back a little bit about what I said about him thinking that the division can be completely eradicated. I think it might be a little bit more nuanced. But um, let's how about we finish up the summary and then think about these questions and close it out. If is that okay?
Please go on.
Sure, sure. Um, so it was it was morning. It was 6 a.m. Never had he fallen asleep in the armchair. He seized his revolver and cast it away. He has ecstasy in life and spread the tidings of the truth. What is this truth? Since then he has been preaching. He loves the ones that laugh at him the best. Why? He knows not. He is told he is vague and confused. He admits that he will make many blunders as he learns to preach. He has seen the truth. He knows, and this is the truth, he knows that people can be beautiful and happy without dying, without losing the power of living on earth. That evil is not the natural condition of mankind. He has seen it, and the living image has filled his soul forever. He knows that people can have it. He is full of courage and freshness. After his dream, he lost control of words. The scoffers call it delirium. So was it a dream? What is a dream? Is not our own life a dream? Everything could be arranged at once, like you said. The chief thing is to love one another as yourself. If everyone wants it, it can be arranged at once. Okay. So I guess the first thing is here, the theological model that Dostoyevsky seems to be working on here is if everyone could just get their mind around the golden rule, right? To treat others as themselves, that we could somehow cast off all this contamination and return to that more idyllic state, which may or may not be true. But my concern about this as a Christian, and where I sort of would contend with him on his theological perspective, is that seems to be putting a lot of the responsibility on man to rewind the clock, when those seem to be things that only can be taken care of through certain sort of eschatological events, such as the second coming of Jesus Christ and the millennial reign and things of this way. In a way, it seems like Dostoevsky thinks that if everyone could just come to a consciousness of Christ's teachings, we could go back. And yes, things might be better, but to think that we could go all the way back to what he witnessed on this twin earth, I don't think that would necessarily be possible. And I think that might run at least counterintuitive to my understanding of what Scripture says if he's coming from a Christian paradigm. What do you think?
Well, I may not have answer to this question, but I think we also need to mention another very important concept of Dostoevsky, which is universal guilt. and
Can you tell us more about that? I'm not familiar with his concept.
it's in the brothers Karamazov, and it's the brother of the starets Zima who said this before he died, and he says that everyone is guilty for before everyone for everything, and he said me more than any other, and it was very important for Dostoyevsky because he repeats this several times in the book, and in his mind it's a solution to the problem of evil. It's to if the problem I think with Christians, some Christians, they are preoccupied by their own salvation, by their own soul, and they are not conscious of the soul of others.
I would contend that they're intermeshed, right? Like if you're truly concerned with your own personal salvation, that's going to overflow into a concern for others. But I understand your point.
Well, there can be a case where someone tries to be perfect, and it has negative consequences on others.
Oh, I'm not interested in being perfect, but I am interested in um, in imitating Christ to the best I can, you know, and being like our madman here, learning to preach. And I've become very pious about these issues, and I've made many mistakes in the effort to disseminate that information, but I'm still learning. So perfection, yeah, I don't think Christianity is about being perfect. Maybe for some people, but I don't think that's the message of Christianity.
Yes, and what I wanted to say is that he had great hope that if people, if some people, and or most people, uh, realize that they are guilty of the fault of others, if they not realize may not be the right verb, but if they accept this, uh, that they are guilty of the fault of others, then it will, and that we are, if they feel responsible for the salvation of the whole world, then it could be a solution to this problem of evil.
Well, I definitely think the world would be a better place, but I think the thing is, if we start to think that it would completely rout out the evil, then it's like we're taking the place of Christ, because really only Christ can redeem the world. Unless you want to start to posit a theological idea that Christ comes back not necessarily in a body again, but through the consciousness of all the believers in Christ, which I know there are some Christians who have this idea. Um, but I worry that, again, pride is entering into the conversation where we think we can do it as an ethical project.
No, I
And
don't think it was Dostoevsky's opinion. And I don't think it's incompatible with the idea that Christ may come back in a more or less physical form. But I think that he cannot, like we see in the um, Great Inquisitor story, if he comes back in a society in which people are not ready, it won't have any consequence. He will be maybe sent to a mental hospital, and
so what you're saying is that the way that we could make these compatible is if you, me, Dostoevsky are in a way thinking of ourselves as preparing the way for Christ's return, but not actually doing the work of Christ.
Yes, and
Still reserving some aspect of the redemption of humanity to Christ, but at least preparing the way for his return.
and also these efforts that we may do, we may not do it by our own forces. We may be helped by God, by Jesus. Maybe He's acting through us as well.
Well, I certainly believe that as a Christian. I
And
mean, the Holy Spirit is in you if you are a Christian.
yes, and I think the answer to your question is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. Uh, very quickly, I, I, I need to eat something, and I need to. Ironically, I have a funeral to attend, so I'd be thinking about all of these things as I'm at the funeral this afternoon. But I think we should close out just thinking about the nature of dreams. Um, you know, I don't have the answer, but in the story, we're presented with a dual reality. Our madman narrator is caught between these two realms of the Edenic realm and the realm where he was going to kill himself. I think the interesting question, if we have a understanding of reality being sort of hyperdimensional, is what is the dream? Is the dream the experience that you and I are consciously having right now that we are mistaking for reality? Was the vision that he had, was that closer to reality? Was that the realest thing that he ever experienced, even though it happened within a dream? Are our dreams the actual place where reality occurs? I don't necessarily have the answers for this. Like I said earlier, I tend to think about them as being sort of divine transmissions. But I think it is important to think about how we demarcate dreams from reality and whether or not that line of demarcation is so firm, if there is bleed between them, and if we're prepared to acknowledge that dreams could be at least a corridor or a glimpse into a higher reality. But I'd like to hear your opinions on what you think dreams are.
Yes, there is also a way of thinking is that to think that everything is consciousness, and as a consequence, dreams are as real as what we experience during the day. And in Jungian psychology, you would say that the dreams are the unconscious speaking to us, and Jung thought that the psyche was was as real as the physical world. So that if you think that there is no how can I say that everything is consciousness, then there is no reality which is more real than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all very interesting. I think we did I think we did a great job here, putting this together so quickly. And I hope there are people out there that benefit from our conversation. I mean, Sophie, we could say so much more, couldn't we? I mean, we just kind of skimmed the surface of this text, but I think we packed it full of a lot of interesting criticism and questions and ideas. Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
I prepared a lot for this
It's obvious you did. Yeah.
Yes, because I was very inspired. So there are a lot of things that I couldn't express, but I'm happy that I have been able to express several of the ideas I had. And I hope I was clear enough, because it's not easy to explain. And
No.
and I would encourage people to read the text, because the words of Dostoyevsky uh, moves may move you very much.
I completely agree. I wouldn't say that this is a substitute for reading it.
It's
Yeah,
not a
and
philosophical text. You have to read the actual text to feel it in your heart.
well, I'll have to say, if you know of any other dream literature about Dostoevsky, I've started to write a little bit. Um, and it looks like a lot about what I'm writing about is about dreams, but ultimately I'm going to write a big book about time, which is connected to dreams because we talked about the unreality of time in dreams, where um, people from who are deceased can visit us in our dreams, and also thousands of years can elapse, like in the visitation of the Greek island in the Twin Earth. So I imagine that this idea is of dreams and time being interconnected will will remain with me for a while. So if you ever want to talk about Dostoevsky or something else, I mean, we may be able to do another one of his short stories, or I just know you're very passionate about Dostoevsky right now,
Yeah.
and more people need to be exposed to this. So I need to wrap it up. If everyone would do me a solid and subscribe to the Noetic YouTube channel, but even better, if you could download the Noetic app and create an account there. I make these conversations and a few other educational materials open to the public on those platforms, but I literally have hundreds and thousands of hours of other intellectual content, be they discussions or recitations of public domain academic journals. They're available there on religion, history, philosophy, theology, you name it. So, um, what you encounter on this YouTube channel or SoundCloud is really just the tip of the iceberg. And I encourage you to just go there and be a participant in that growing community. And I want to thank Sophie so much. Sophie, I'm sorry it's been so long since we talked, but I'm so glad we found this opportunity to reconnect and discuss one of our favorite things, or one of our favorite pieces of writing now.
Thank you so much, Luke. It was an amazing time for me too.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.